Hi, everyone. Welcome to our 2025 Directors Closeup Spirit Awards edition. I am Maria Raquel Bossi, Senior Director of Education and International Programs at Film Independent. Before we start, I want to take a moment to thank all the partners that make Film Independent's important work possible. Thank you to this year's incredible supporters of the Directors Closeup, the Directors Guild of America, IMDb Pro, and SAG Indie. And thank you to our 2025 Film Independent Spirit Awards supporters, Premier Partner Lavazza, Principal Partner IMDb Pro, and official partners Bullet Frontier Whiskey, Fiji Water, and Mirabal. We so appreciate your support of the independent film community. Today, we are joined by the nominees for Best Documentary. And personally, I am really excited to have this panel to explore these diverse docs that run the gamut from the very intimate portraits and self-reflective journeys to explorations of communal traditions and some of the political cultural movements of our time. And to do so, here we are with these amazing filmmakers, Michael Dweck and Gregory Kershaw of Gaucho. Gaucho, welcome, guys.
Hello.
Oh, hey.
Here. Johan Grimonprez from Soundtrack of a Coup d'etat.
Hello.
Hi, Johan. How are you? Great to see you.
Good.
And
Nice
last
to be
but
here.
not least, Ted Passon, director of Patrice, the movie. Welcome, Ted.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Wonderful to see you all here. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us today, and congratulations for your nomination. Our moderator today is a friend of Film Independent, and who is the festival director and founder of the True Falls Film Festival, David Wilson. Welcome, David, and thank you for joining us today. Take it away.
Thank you so much. I will say a small correction, no longer director, just founder. I get to just now go and watch movies at True Falls, which is wonderful.
Noted.
It's great to be here and great to get to talk about these films, which are extraordinary. So thank you all for making the time and space for this. I'm going to dive right in with an idea I think about a lot when it comes to doc filmmaking. We know that docs are journeys, right? And starting on one is committing yourself to an unknown multi-year journey. And so I wonder if each of you might sort of talk a little bit about the moment when you knew this topic was going to be one you were willing to devote yourself to. If there's a specific moment you can think of in the process where you thought, there might really be something here. I want to go further. I want to keep exploring. Let's start with Gregory and Michael, one of you.
Well, I guess Gregory and I were talking about this project probably, I don't know, 15 or 16 years ago when we were working on our first film, The Last Race. And I remember we were both traveling to South America separately. I was traveling there in the early 90s. I met my wife in Argentina, and I started to meet the Gaucho community. I'm always fascinated by them and started to photograph them. And Gregory was also, working down in all through Latin America, exploring relationships between tradition communities and their land. And so all through, even the truffle hunters, we were talking about going down to Argentina. And I think the first trip did it for us. It was very difficult to find the communities that we really wanted to. And the way we work is that we don't take the camera with us first. We spend like a month or more, or sometimes 2 months, and just sit and just spend time in the community. And in this case, it was eating a lot of meat and drinking a lot of wine in a box and just getting to know the community. And I think, after that trip, we said, well, we don't know, we never know if there's a story there, but we have a hunch that there's something really interesting in this place, and we enjoy being in these places. So we said, we want to hang out here for 2 years, and we said, let's give it a shot and see how it goes. And that's how it went. It worked out.
Yeah, I just want to add, the way we make films it's a crazy process that I really wouldn't recommend to anybody. Is that we we show up at a place, and there's kind of there's a curiosity that Michael described, and we just start meeting people, and we just start following people that we think are fascinating. And we know that something will happen, something will emerge, a story. There's things to discover, but when we begin, we have absolutely no idea what the project is going to be. It's just a curiosity that we follow.
Ed, Johan?
Who's go first? Shall I go first?
You want to go?
Okay. Well, yeah, it was a long journey to dive into the rabbit hole of archives. But initially, I knew about Nikita Khrushchev's slamming of the shoe at the General Assembly. That I knew because I had researched, being a kid of the television generation, growing up with the Cold War, born in Europe and Belgium, jammed between East and West. And so Nikita Khrushchev was a figure we grew up with, partially on a big part on television. And he had functioned in the previous film as a Hitchcock doubleganger with the culture of the rise of fear that was focused in the film of Double Take, the Fear Box. But what I never knew actually, and only realized later, was that the slamming of the shoe was because of the Congo crisis and a black page out of the history of my own country. And so for me, the film itself was a learning curve. And of course, it's sort of roots and go back to sort of being born as a Belgian and never has learned the story of the Belgian Congo in a true way, what actually exactly happened, because it's so much intertwined with the history of our country. Most of Brussels is laid out with rubber money, the avenues, the Royal Palace, the Palais de Justice, so built with rubber money. But something I felt unacknowledged that actually was never sort of out there openly. And digging into the story, I found more and more evidence and details about what my country actually, in an event, was complicit in first the downfall of the first democratically elected leader of the Congo, our colony, and then subsequently the assassination. And that actually was really shocking to find also that the United Nations was complicit, the then Secretary General Dacquin was killed, and of course the monarchy in our country. And so as a Belgian, for me, after the previous film Shadow, which was digging into the corruption of the global arms trade, which is a pleonasm, but there was a template there of how the corporatocracy is very much dictating foreign policy. And again, here was the same template where the mining industry was actually complicit or involved. And that corporatocracy spread between the Union Minière, which was previously Leopold II's sort of company, but also Allen Dulles, Foster Dulles, the Deputy Secretary of Defense in the United States, Dillon, all leading up to President Eisenhower, were actually all involved in this mining industry and involved in the murder of Patrice Lumumba. So that was the story I embarked on, but it was down the rabbit hole, finding a lot of other stuff that actually was linked to that. And that music also was a big part of that, as not just as a soundtrack, but as in that pivotal moment, as actually historical agent, but also political agent. We can talk more about that, but that was for me also quite crucial.
I mean, just to follow up on that, did you know the role music would play in your film from early on, or did that come later in the editing room, or how was that? I
knew, well, researching the Belgian television was co-producers, and we had this We Insist Freedom Now performance, which is the album by the Max Roach Quartet, and where Abby Lincoln sets forth on a screaming fit, but actually finding that actually the protest of when the murder of Patrice Lumumba was announced in the Security Council, that 60 protesters were actually crashing the Security Council and held a riot, that was actually initiated by Abby Lincoln, together with the Women Writers Coalition in Harlem, Maya Angelou and Rosa Guy. And that literally, it was musicians that initiated that protest. But not only that, it was the first scene we had, actually. It was the end of the film, but it's also what we knew we had to work through. And that was the first thing we had. But also I knew about Louis Armstrong as a jazz ambassador arriving in the Congo. But what I did not know, that he was used as a decoy to actually hush up and as a cover, that actually the State Department was plotting to kill Patrice Lumumba in the cohorts with the Belgian Secret Service. And so music became sort of, it grew and grew, and it became very much part as I could not make it the music as a protagonist. Of course, not only the jazz, but also the rumba. And the rumba has a peculiar story in that as well. Patrice Lumumba was released from prison, came to Brussels for the Roundtable to claim independence, but he was accompanied by the rumba artist, Joseph Kabasele, and African jazz. And when independence was claimed in Brussels at the Roundtable, on the spot, Joseph Kabasele and African jazz in the Plaza Hotel in Brussels composed Independence Cha-Cha, which became a very much a political song, like became a big hit in the continent of Africa, so much so that Independence Cha-Cha became the liberation, the name of the liberation movement in Rhodesia then for independence that ultimately became Zimbabwe. So the music was always very close when it comes to the political sort of context.
And Ted, you've had the most time to think about this question. What do you
Yeah,
think?
it's true. I mean, I probably had the most time to gestate on the project. So mine started, I met the main subject of the film over 20 years ago. She's my friend's aunt. And I just kind of fell in love with her the moment that I met her. And it was always in the back of my head, like, I want to do something with her. I don't know what it is, but I want to make some sort of project someday. And we just kept in touch over the years. We'd see each other. My friend, who's her niece, is a touring musician, Kimia Dawson. So she would tour like through town a couple times a year. We would always end up at the shows together. We'd see each other regularly, and so we just always kept in touch and we talked. And then it wasn't until just a few years ago, I was working on a series for Netflix that was actually started by one of our producers on this film, Emily Spivak. And we brought Patrice into just like a little part of it, like just to film this little segment. And just, she was just so comfortable on camera, was having such a good time. And it was so fun doing it together that when I finished my last project, Philly DA, which was just a very intense and exhausting project, and was just trying to think like, what would be, what would I want in my life for the next thing? And just the idea of just getting to be around Patrice and doing something with her felt like is something worth exploring. So, her and Emily and I were talking about it, and we're trying to figure out, what is it even a documentary? What is this project? We don't know. And then, in trying to figure out if there was anything going on in her life, that nothing really seemed obvious. And then at some point while we were talking, and we'd already started just filming a little bit, just kind of messing around and just kind of getting a feel, seeing what was there. Around that time, her partner, Gary, proposed to her. And I had no idea at the time that if you are disabled in America and in many other countries, and you're collecting government benefits, that you lose your benefits and your healthcare if you get married. And so that was kind of we were kind of like looking for what is the thing. And then as soon as we realized that was what was happening in their lives and right in front of us, it was like, oh, that will be the thing. And we just kind of went off in that direction. And there was a lot of twists and turns along the way if you've seen the film, but that was kind of like the spark that made it feel like, okay, this is what we're doing, and now's the time.
We've got another guest. You want to introduce yourself?
All right.
Hi, sorry.
Hello.
My name is Silvia Castaños, and I am one of the directors for Hummingbirds.
Welcome, Silvia. It's great to have you here. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
So you're right on time for this question, which is, we see trends come and go in documentary filmmaking. And I think there's been a movement in recent years sort of back towards personal films, right? A lot of films where the director is a central character. I guess, Silvia, I want to talk to you about that idea and the challenges of being both on screen and behind the camera for you.
Yeah, that's a interesting question. I think I feel like I've seen a lot of like personal documentaries as of lately, and they've been just really, I feel like they've been very creative, and I feel like ours also kind of lands in that like spectrum of like, it's very non-traditional, I feel, and obviously like the way people have like come up with like, different ways of like bringing themselves into the story, whether it's their story or not. And yeah, I mean, the challenges that I've faced have been kind of like in the process of like editing, right? I think maybe Hummingbirds had a very intense time because we stopped filming because of COVID. And that's where we kind of drew the line. We were like, we're not gonna keep filming. This is where we're gonna keep it at this like summer that we had together. And it was just really interesting to kind of like come into this like circle of like other filmmakers and be like, yeah, this is like a film about like ourselves, and then we're also the directors, and like kind of getting that idea across. You'd be surprised, it's actually really hard. And a lot of people were like, why did you do that, or what does it mean, and why did you record it this way, and like all of these like questions. And I think the hardest part might be that there have been a lot of people who maybe before the film was out, and like now that we're like nominated and all these things, like before, people maybe didn't trust in that like process, and didn't trust that this kind of film could be successful. But like now, I mean, there's lots of personal films that are very, very successful. So yeah.
Thank you for that. And I want to sort of flip the question now. And I guess for the rest of you, how do you think about your position as a character in your movie, even if that is a position of absence? Like, how did you think about your role in terms of the movie as we watch it?
Well, with our filmmaking, as we talked about earlier, we're entering into communities that we're not a part of, and our filmmaking process is very much rooted in building relationships with the people in these communities and following the people that we're fascinated by. And what we try to do is really we try to be mirrors in our filmmaking. We try to make the film a sort of a mirror of what we're experiencing, and not everything that we're experiencing, the things that we find the most beautiful, the most fascinating, the most interesting. And the process that Michael and I engage in through making these films over a long period of time, like Gaucho, we filmed for 2 years, and it was a process of trying to figure out how do we take what's in front of us and translate it into cinema, and figuring out what that means, and figuring out what that means for the language of the filmmaking, for what the film is going to look like, what it's going to sound like, what it's going to feel like, and that impacts really that idea of translating what we're experiencing into cinema is at the root of everything we do. And it's every little decision we make is, where, if we're going to put the camera up high or low, or if we're going to film at a certain time of day, we're always thinking, how do we film this moment that we're so lucky to experience, and how do we do it in a way that the audience will feel what we felt while we were there?
I was just going to add that in a lot of ways we're trying to maybe teach the audience how to see again by taking time. And that's why we compose these frames very carefully. They're directed, and we want the audience to just slow down and really observe this beautiful world that we've been fortunate enough to be invited into. And that's why a lot of what we do are just one-shot scenes that are very long, and that you can really study, and just look at details, and also listen to the sounds of these worlds. And because we have you in a movie theater, which is great, and so we try to take full advantage of that.
I just want to add one other thing, and then we can move on. The dance that we're doing while we're filming is also, these images, we think about them, we think about the time of day, we think about the framing, and we are constantly dancing with the reality in front of us in a way that we can create these images, but also let life happen unimpacted as much as possible by the filmmaking process. And that's part of the reason that these films take so long, because we talk to the people we're filming, we understand what they want us to film, we understand the patterns in their life, so we can film these moments and hopefully do it in a very artful way, but do it without disturbing what's the reality that's unfolding in front of the camera, and capture the authenticity of lives being lived.
And do you think that do you think that you know, I feel like I've heard both sides of the debate. Like, do you think people actually forget the camera is there, or do you think they just evolve into a sort of a kind of performance that feels more natural, but is still performance?
I think in our case, they forget about the camera because, well, one advantage we have, the camera is still. So it's not, it's not really intruding in their lives. And plus, we keep coming back. So I mean, the way we work is we shoot for 2 to 3 weeks, we take 3 weeks off and then repeat and do that throughout 2 years. So eventually the camera kind of becomes part of us. Plus our crews are very small. It's Gregory and I and a sound person pretty much, and that's it. So we're not really intruding in their lives. And as Gregory was saying, they have rituals, and you keep seeing the same patterns repeat in their lives. They have all their meals in the same place, pretty much talk about what's going on in their days. So they do eventually just forget about the camera. We're not, we don't have these massive lights. We don't have, we're not kind of moving around in their faces. So I think that's one of the things that works really well in our films, that helps you kind of immerse yourselves in these environments.
Yeah, I would say for me, similarly, it was, I think in the beginning, because I knew the subject so well, we'd known each other for 20 years, we had a relationship. There is a step of now introducing a camera in between us, which, we're so used to that not being the case. And so I think in the beginning, it was a little weird. It was a little awkward. In some ways, there was a period of like noticing the camera, but, for me, it's always just about like, just going and going and going as much as possible, like being there all the time, just normalizing being around with the camera, and after a while, it does just become part of hanging out. And so at a certain point, there was actually one scene in particular which actually opens the film, which is the first time I felt like in the beginning of filming where, maybe, I don't know, 2 months in, where it felt like, okay, I think we finally got there. I think we finally actually kind of forgot about the camera. Everybody's really just feels like themselves in a way that, I felt like we were kind of like gearing up to. And I do think there is something, to the all the time. Certainly, they just get used to the practice of the abstractness of taking footage and nobody's seeing it. It's not existing. And so I do think there's this idea that, it's what matters. It's hard what is focused, so what be self-conscious about. I think, but I think, that was kind of an interesting process of kind of like working a camera into a relationship that I already had.
I feel like there's again, a commonality in doc culture, and this is expanded into the larger culture, talking about the difference between like sort of like truth, capital T, and emotional truths or subjective truths. And I think it's sort of easier to maybe like skate through, honestly, when one's dealing with sort of small personal stories, right? Like the sort of like, well, these are our people's truths. Johan, I wonder if you would talk about like how you feel your responsibility to truth is, capital T or lowercase t.
Yeah, mine is a more tricky one, right? So, I think truth is always relational, first of all. But that's a bigger philosophical question. But indeed, I'm a Belgian. I'm part of the context that was part of the scene of the perpetrator, right? So, I've been part of that tradition, grew up with that, even growing up in ignorance. And so there's the danger of appropriation. And I could not tell the story of Patrice Lumumba. I could not do that, but I could tell how my country was involved and dig into, what is sort of linked to my own past and open up that dark page. And so in doing so, for me, it was crucial to invite and because I think there's a difference between speaking for and speaking with. And so for me, it was crucial to invite several points of view in a kaleidoscopic perspective, inviting four narrators. A fifth one could be the music as well. But one, for example, was Nkole Jean-Bofani, who was the Belgian-Congolese novelist. And he has his own peculiar perspective, what he would call the Congolese algorithm, that every conflict mineral that was sourced from the Congo during the 20th century was used in every major war up to today with war in space. that even sort of with conflict minerals now, it still has not stopped and doesn't benefit the population. So that was one entry, but he takes it all the way up to today, because I didn't want the film, even if it's all archives, he's one of the few filmed characters. I didn't want the film to be a nostalgic trap. And so he takes it all the way up to today, what we see in East Congo, and that what's set in motion as a story in the film is exponentially even worse in the East Congo, where 1 in 10 women is still being raped. And so even today, you know, Americans were expatriated from the East part where Goma is being invaded. And so it hasn't disappeared. It was genocide after genocide after genocide, as John Bufani says. Second, there was a very interesting character, André Blouin, who, because, yeah, as a woman, she was written out of history because women were not allowed to vote, were not part of the government. But I'm sure if she, if that would have been the case, Patrice Lumumba, of which she was the speechwriter and chief of protocol, would have invited her to be part of the government. But she was written out of history merely because she was a woman, and she was put on the death list, a death list that also contained Patrice Lumumba by the Belgian Secret Service and also the CIA. She was also on Alice Dulles' death list. But getting in, like, you couldn't find her memoirs anymore, so it was out of print, and we got in touch with Yves Blouin, and she became a very important sort of advisor. And ultimately, we had André Blouin memoirs as a narration through the film from her perspective as being close to Patrice Lumumba, but also from the perspective as the leader of a women's movement that actually tipped the vote of Patrice Lumumba towards the majority that he was able to have the right to make the government, which was boycotted by Belgium, by the way. A third character is Conor Cruz O'Brien, who was the Irish representative of the United Nations. But in his memoirs, I read firsthand about the genocide in 1964, which is part of the film as well. And then a fourth character, which is the point of view of the villain, which is often more interesting. But that's Nikita Khrushchev, who was slamming his shoe and pounding his fist. But he was the one initiating sort of all world leaders would come to the United Nations 15th General Assembly, where 16 African countries were invited to be part of the world body, which tipped the majority vote towards the global South, which was very threatening. And so East and West, Nikita Khrushchev and President Eisenhower, States Departments were scrambling to wrestle control of that General Assembly. And so Nikita Khrushchev would propose I'm sorry, I'm getting into the story, but we have to go back to the question. But a fourth character was, of course, Nikita Khrushchev, but he tells it from his own perspective. As you know, while we sort of were researching to the UN archives and translated his speeches, we found moments that were sort of incredible that I never heard. And he was mistranslated, right? So he never said, we're going to bury America. He said, we're going to bury colonialism. And ultimately, he proposed the decolonization resolution, which I didn't know either. But so to start this film, I could not but start in dialogue and revisiting that history. And so in a sense, you know, I've mentioned that before, it's also at the point where you have to decolonize the archive. And Georges Nuzolo-Natali, who's a Congolese historian, says, you know, when you want to write history in the Congo, you have to go back to the colonial motherland, because all of those sources are still held by sort of colonial institutions. And so it was a dialogue of trying to open that up. And all the intimate footage of all the characters I just mentioned, so generously donated or intimate footage. And so that became also the basis for the bigger global story and that very intimate story of all the home movies that we were able to include. So the personal story is more there, and trying to open up that dialogue and open up what that truth literally is, right? And it's through dialogue and through verifying that suddenly you hear very different stories.
Silvia, this is Hummingbirds is your and Estefania's first film. And I wonder if you would talk a bit about like whether that like at moments, and maybe both, but whether that emboldened you to sort of do things because you had no restrictions, you had no expectations, or moments that you look back on and you're sort of like, oh, I wish I'd known that now, or what I know now then.
Yeah, could you be like more specific about like where in the process maybe you're referring to?
Like thinking about, think about like during the shoot,
Mm-hmm.
were there things where you felt like, hey, we can experiment with something,
Mm.
or something you sort of felt like you could push for because you're like, there's no expectations, the stakes are low or whatever?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I feel like I feel like when you mentioned the expectations were low, I feel like I have to tell people like why the expectations were low. And it's because when we were making this film, I genuinely was like, this is gonna play at, like, we're gonna get a private room at the Alamo Draft House near my house, and my mom's gonna watch this film, and then we're gonna call it a day, and then that's it. So I was not expecting to be nominated for Best Documentary here alongside all of you. This is exciting. So yeah, when we were filming, we like came up with all of these ideas. Like, we were like, what if we did this? What if we did that? Like, um, you know, at first we were like, we're not making a documentary, we're gonna do this. But you know, Estefania and I used to watch these like skateboard documentaries on YouTube of like people who were like running around with their friends and skateboarding, or like those, like, I don't know if you guys have seen it, the fixed gear biking community documentaries, like Bike Messengers, and it's just like all around on their bikes. And that's kind of like where we kind of drew inspiration from at first, because we were like, what if we just hung out like the kids on their skateboards, and then made this like documentary to show like our families, like, that we're like friends and we love each other, and like this is our lives, and look at how we live our silly little lives on the border despite like all of these like things that we deal with as a family. And so it did feel like there was like some kind of emboldened feeling of like, well, we lose nothing doing whatever we want right now. So I feel like those were kind of that's exactly what it was when we were filming this film.
There's a wonderful history adjacent to documentary of all of the like skate and bike documentary stuff that I love. All of you, every one of these films, maybe unsurprisingly, has an incredible, deep, resonant connection between image and content. They are matched, right? They're of a piece. And so I'm curious to hear a bit from all of you about that. But Ted, I want to start with you because you made some really bold decisions, visually in your film. And like, what led you to that? What made you think this is not simply going to be an observational documentary, which might have been great on its own, but you were pushed to go further. So talk about that.
Yeah, so I mean, there were there were two tracks, right? So there's like the verite storyline in the film, which, I was trying to, give it its own look, in the sense of like, trying to, this person who already had a relationship with, who I already loved, and trying to like try to make the film look like, as much as I could, recreate how I look at her, and just like the love I have for her, and just also like the way that she makes me see the world, and trying to frame stuff in that as I was shooting. So that was kind of one consideration that was kind of like driving the thought there. But then in terms, there's this whole other storyline that's interwoven in the film that it involves recreations of her past life, and you kind of get to see all of the things that happened in her life that basically take you up to where the film begins. And that wasn't something that we went into the film thinking we were going to do. But there were kind of like two tracks that ended up meeting up to make that happen. So there was the idea of like, Patrice is an artist, and her aesthetic and her artwork is so core and key to who she is. The film had to have her aesthetic. And so we're trying to think of like more active ways for her artwork to somehow be a part of the film. And then also, it's like, we've known each other forever, and Patrice is someone who kind of always talks in stories. So I would hear a lot over the years about her life. But now when it's like your job to ask your friend questions about their life, suddenly you're learning all these new things. And her backstory suddenly became crucial. It was just like, oh, we can't do this without her backstory. So how do we bring that to life? And so the first thought was like, okay, well, maybe this is a way that Patrice's artwork can get in there, and she can draw the world. She can design the worlds of these recreations. And she had been working on a graphic novel about her life anyways. She already been kind of doing all these drawings. And so, but then the thought was, okay, but what do you do with these drawings? Animation didn't seem right. And it kind of made sense that, she would at a certain point, it was like, well, she would have to play herself because there's nobody else that could play her. There's no other way to convey her without it just being her. It just wouldn't work. So then the thought was like, okay, so it's her. We have these drawings, which kind of evoke the idea of these kind of flat backgrounds, kind of like almost like school play style backdrops. So we ended up kind of going in that motif. And there was the idea of like, okay, well, how do you populate the world? How do you fill it out? And Patrice used to have a public access kids television show years ago, and she just loves being around kids. And so there was that kind of became a thought, like, oh, you know, like what would be, first it was like, what would be fun? And it was just like, okay, what if we populated the world all with kids? And, you know, what felt right about that was that, like, one, you know, it gave us this like, this kind of wink and this kind of way to take like some really dark things that happen in her life and kind of find a lightness in them, which is something that she does in the way she talks. And it just felt like a challenging thing to recreate. She could tell you about the worst thing that's ever happened to, in her life, just a really horrible thing. And she will find a joke. She will find a way to make it funny. So we're like, how, you know, and that felt like a way we could do that. And then what was also just nice about it was that, you know, when you juxtapose innocence of a child with the inhumanity of an ableist system, it really kind of lays it all out more bare. And so that juxtaposition felt really great too. And it kind of allowed us to kind of, you know, bring in the emotion in unexpected ways. And so it was a really fun thing to play with. Yeah, so that's kind of how we ended up going down that road.
Thanks. I had no idea that she had that show either. Now I want to like see
Yeah.
it was a kid show. Michael and Gregory, and in terms of the same question, but I found this quote that I feel like maybe was even misquoted. But you said that you only shoot one shot a day when you're shooting. Am I wrong? Or unpack that for us. Talk about that process.
Yeah, well, that's often the case. I mean, especially when we start off. And I would say even more so in this film, because there were many days when we don't shoot any shots because, you know, we'd plan to shoot with somebody and their cows would get out in the middle of the night and we'd spend a few days looking for them. But on the days that we do shoot in the beginning, you know, it's waiting. It's this, as we talked about before, this dance between sort of our process of creating an image and the reality in front of us. And a lot of that is just waiting, and it's hanging out with people and it's getting to know them, and it's waiting for all these elements to come together at the right time. It's waiting for, we're waiting for the light. We're waiting for an action. We're waiting for something interesting. And, sometimes those things happen very quickly and we'll be out and it's completely unplanned and we'll just, we'll see the wind will start blowing, for example, and, the kids will be playing with their ponchos and it's like, that's just it's a bit of a miracle of a shot. And we start rolling the camera. Other times, we know two people are going to get together and they're going to be sitting at a table. We're waiting for the light to come in through the window in the right way, or maybe we're setting up a little light, and then we'll just set the camera down and we'll roll, and we roll for as long as the conversation goes on. And sometimes that's 10 minutes and sometimes it's like 3 hours. And it's waiting for those moments of magic to happen. And then of course, when we have those long conversations in the film, there's no editing within the scenes. Everything is just one shot. So it becomes a really interesting, creating this mosaic is a really interesting challenge, because as we're looking at 3 hours of conversation, we're going through and finding the interesting moments, but then they have to be the moments that would fit the story. And in a normal, more traditional verite style documentary, you'd have coverage. So you can kind of take something that happens over here and something that happens over here and meld them together into sort of a single scene. But here we just have one little piece. So it's searching for that little piece that's going to help us propel the story forward.
It's the first thing the editor asked us is where's the other hard drive with the coverage. That was Truffle Hunters, we lost 3 editors in the first 3 weeks. We went through 3 editors because they just thought we had no films. It wasn't any coverage to cut to. So that was a challenge. And in Argentina, when we were in Northwest, we were kind of near Bolivia and Chile. The light is just so harsh. That's one of the reasons why we also shot end of the day. We shoot at magic hour because it's just too harsh any other time during the day, or we'll just shoot it, sun up. So we get 35 or 40 minutes to shoot. So it's precious, but also we lose a lot. We just have to, but that's why our films take so long to make.
Following up on that and bringing in a question from the chat, and folks are free to throw questions into the Q&A chat and I'll work them in. This is from Marty, but you know, what's your process working with an editor? What's your ideal process working with an editor? For all of you, do you want to hand somebody a bunch of footage and say like, show me what you see, and then we'll talk about it? Or do you like to be there from the beginning, kind of guiding the process? Do you do any of your own cutting? And you guys can jump in, or anyone can jump in.
I think, okay, sorry.
Oh, sorry. To jump in really quickly just to say that I feel like the Hummingbirds process was really unique because we had hired like 4 first-time editors, and then they all flew down to Laredo, 2 of whom were, you know, Texas natives, like Tex-Mex natives, and we all had sleepovers and would watch like long cuts of the film and then be like, this is what we want to do. And we did like this. We had hired someone, her name is Dawn Valadez, who kind of helped us like team build. And so we would have like these like week-long sleepovers, and all we would watch is like raw footage, and we would eat a lot of snacks, and then we would hang out in the pool, and that's kind of like the vibe that we had. And then it wasn't until like the very end that we've made like millions of different like versions of what the film could be, and like different like kind of scenes and cuts and like, you know, all of those things, that we finally hired like you know, an editor, Isidore Betel, who has, you know, a lot of experience. And then we would have our week-long like sessions with him, and so then it would just become like 4 of us locked in a room. So it'd be Isidore, Jillian, who's a producer, and then me and Estefania, and it was kind of the same thing, right, where we've went through all of this like long process of working with these 4 first-time editors, of watching raw footage and then trying to make a shape out of it, and then working with Isidore to finally create the final product. To yeah.
That's yeah, we had a similar like kind of group process on Patrice. We ended up with a 4-person edit team. We had 2 lead editors and 2 associate editors, and so we just have a lot of conversations, you know. So we kind of start in the beginning, and we had all of these different storylines in the film, some that just never made it in the final version. But in the beginning, and trying to figure out what's important and what's not, you know, we had these like scene cards essentially for each storyline, and it was just kind of like a discussion in the beginning about like, hey guys, I think this, what do you think? You know, or just keep that in your mind as you're looking at it, but you tell me what you think. And so everybody kind of got assigned a storyline, or multiple storylines depending. And so we just did these storyline edits, and there was just these long string outs. And then we would have sessions where we would watch them down, talk about it. And you know, one of the nice thing about having a big team, and also a very diverse team, is we had people coming from many different backgrounds. We had folks with different disabilities that kind of mimic some of the folks on camera. And so just hearing everybody's reactions to what was happening in the different storylines, and what was important, what was not important. Oh, you know, hey, this character's going through this thing right now. I don't know that you noticed, but go ask them about this, because, you know, like, I'm autistic. I know exactly what she's going through right now. Like, you know, we have to push more on this. And then in the process of doing that, you know, we kind of got to the part we thought the storylines were like in a decent place. And then we started trying to put them together and seeing how the whole thing kind of braided together. But it was interesting in that process, you know, there was one storyline that I thought was going to be like the backbone of the film, and it like barely made it into the final version. The more we started looking at the different storylines and kind of seeing what we were actually drawn to, and what was like really moving the story in the best way. Yeah, but it was a very, very iterative process, and our edit schedule, you know, ended up, I think it was about 15 months or something like that.
Johan, I mean,
shall I jump in?
Yeah, talk about your
shall I jump in? Well, yeah, with the archives, a lot of building and writing. The writing literally for me happens in the editing, so I'm there from beginning to end. But also, And so coming from the tradition as an editor director, so I'm like there from beginning to end. But the way we had conceived the editing, and it picks up with the previous question as well, that, you know, if sort of the music steps onto the political stage, you know, in the editing, thought, why don't we reverse the role and we sort of let politicians be the lead singers of the jazz compositions? So to reverse the roles and working through the juxtapositions. For me, it was not so much about, you know, that the images and the content match, but actually working through juxtapositions and contradictions. And that's where the music comes in, where it can question very much what the role of the image would be and vice versa. And so that happens in the editing process. But a lot of the archives is just, you know, it's about working through contradictions. And sometimes the music can open up a third space where it doesn't sort of correspond what's being shown, or vice versa, or even the text can add to that, because there's a lot of text, even footnotes, even the page numbers. I often joke it's like an academic PDF edited as a feature film, a feature music clip. And so, yeah, working with the editor, like his background as a musician, he was actually an intern. He was also first-time editor. And so taking him along with his expertise was, for me, it's very often a sounding board. You know, you don't have to necessarily agree, but you have to be on the same page, meaning that you understand each other. But then to the disagreement, sometimes you can come to different solutions, different sort of ways of looking at the project. And so one-on-one is three very often. Also, what happens within sort of the juxtaposition itself, that actually cinematic space can open up. So that's crucial.
What's harder, beginnings or endings?
Well, with this film, the ending was there from the very beginning. We had the screaming of Abby Lincoln. You have the structure of the film is, of course, we insist freedom now, and the General Assembly, 15 General Assembly top. That is a structure, and then we zoom in on the more sort of ground zero role of the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. But the very first scene we had was the screaming fit of Abby Lincoln, and we knew we had to work towards that. So in that sense, the ending was quite important, but we knew also that we wanted to open with the drum and the opening drum salvo of Max Roach, and so that's bookending the film. But yeah, the ending was easy this time. With other films, it was not. Depends on the story, of course. Yeah.
What about the rest of y'all?
Well, I think for us, we don't enter the edit with a story. So that's the challenge, I think, for the editor. We worked with great editor Gabriel Rhodes. And I think, for us, the stories come from spending time with the characters and also, digging through the footage. And the other challenge is that our structure is because we have 5, sometimes 6 characters, it's a mosaic structure for the edit. And that's also very challenging because we have so few pieces in our film. We have 110 scenes in our film. There's 110 clips in our film, and that's it. So editing wise, once you move one piece of that puzzle, it really changes the entire composition of the film. So that's it's hard. And we're also very conscious of story, of using kind of prose to tell story and poetry to make you feel something. And that's something that we wrestled with kind of in the edit, and also the way music plays in our edit, where I think what we do, we also, we'll, for the beginning of our process, the 2 years, we'll collect the sound library. Gregory and I, because we have plenty of time in our van during the day, waiting for the light, to just talk about music and talk about shots and character and story. And that's, we're talking to sound designers like before we even start the film. We're talking to sound designers and a composer and friends of ours just to get an idea for scenes that we might have in our head. So when we come to the edit, we might have said, Gabriel, well, here's a piece of music that we think could just work so perfect for this shot. That changes everything for us. So that's so it's hard. I mean, our processes, I'm sure everybody's editing process are, but ours is, we have so few shots in a film like this, and we have so many characters to wrestle with that you have to keep track of. So it's always, quite challenging. But with Gaucho, I mean, Gabriel spent, I guess he spent, 6-7 weeks to footage, and then we started to jump in with him, and then we stay with him. I think the last 2 months we sit every day with him, kind of fine tuning the film.
One of the things that's part of our process of making films and really helpful with the editing process is while we're filming, we always make a sizzle reel. I mean, I guess it serves a practical function of helping us raise money for the project. So we do this when we're sort of halfway shooting, which I guess is pretty typical of a documentary, but it's also really helpful for us just in the creative process, because through that sizzle reel, we really we solidify the style of the film, the tone of the film. It helps us figure out which characters we want to continue filming with and focus in on. And it also forces us to just really start thinking about what their stories could be. And, you know, all those are questions that we don't really have an answer to until we go into the edit, but at least it gets that process going and shapes the way that we film as after we've completed it.
There's a friend of mine likes to say that there's the movie you set out to make, then there's the movie you think you made, and then there's the movie that other people see and sort of reflect back to you. And I wonder if you all would talk about what's surprised you the most in terms of the movie that audiences have sort of told you that you've made. Or anything. Has anything surprised you?
Well, I mean, in our film, because we focus on, there's really 7 different characters, and it's one of the things that's always exciting is, you know, people always sort of seem to zero in on one of them. There's one of them that they connect to, and it's always they take something kind of unexpected and different. I mean, at our first screening at Sundance, we had somebody come up to us and say, there's a father-son story, and it's a very small story about a father and son who spend a beautiful summer together, and then he has to go to school and leave his father, and his father is going to continue working alone without him. And somebody came up to us and said, this inspired me to call my son, who I hadn't spoken to for 10 years, and now I'm going to reach out to them. And so there's just very specific reactions that we've had to like that throughout traveling around the world with this film, where somebody kind of zeroes in on a specific character, and there's just kind of something in them that draws them to that character. And for us, that's a very beautiful thing, because we fall in love with all the people that we're filming with, and our goal is just to kind of to share their lives in a way that they would want their lives to be shared, but also in a way that just brings people into the love that we feel for them.
I have just one thing to add about a surprise moment from another film unrelated to this, but The Truffle Hunters, when we screened the film in Italy, because it took place in Italy, somebody stood up in the front row and said, "Thank God for Christopher Columbus," and gave us like a big kiss. So that was a surprise.
It's an unexpected surprise.
Unexpected surprise. We thought he was going to knife us. We didn't know what was going on. He didn't. So that was good.
Ted?
I think, I mean, in some ways, I'm always a little surprised when the movie gets completed, because it always feels, when you're in the middle of it, sometimes it's hard to imagine that the thing's ever going to be done. But I think, some reactions that I guess did surprise me a little bit. We did, someone actually came up to me once at a screening, very emotional, and they just really connected to in the back, like the recreation storyline is really about Patrice's relationship to her mother, and to them, like, that took center stage, and it was like a story of like a mother and daughter trying to find like forgiveness in a difficult relationship. And to me, it was always kind of like a little bit of a back burner story, and so it was a surprise that it resonated so strongly with that person and with some other people I talked to. Especially because we're telling that story, and her mother is being played by like an 11-year-old girl on a stage that's very fantastical, and so I just love that it connected, and that we were able to kind of find that. And I think that was actually a very difficult character to kind of shape in the film. And that was a big collaboration with Patrice in trying to figure out, there was some very dark things in that story, in her relationship with her mother. And, you know, it could have been in early cuts, it was kind of easy to hate her mother, honestly. And so we really worked with her to try to figure out, you know, how to balance that, which was very important to her and very important to the family, that it not come off like that. And so I was happy feeling like that we had kind of solved, and we kind of preserved the complexity and solved that. And the fact that, you know, someone else could see their own life in that is, you know, it's always like the best, you know, possible gift. So.
A little twist on that question, Silvia, I wonder, like, the experience of like having people watch your most intimate moments in life on screen, I cannot imagine and horrifies me. How has that been? And has it gotten more comfortable as you've shown the movie more, or what's been that process?
It's been interesting. I think, well, I have to admit, when we went to Berlinale, I wasn't expecting people to be sitting like fully sat at the screening. So that was like, I had never seen the film be seen by other people until we got to Berlinale like that. Like normally, like we'd have like our friend who was actually like Jillian's neighbor from downstairs who watched it with us once, right before that. So to just sit down in like a theater of like hundreds of people, that was crazy and scary, because it's like, you're right, it is very intimate moments. And like when I see other people's films of people whom I've met, I feel like connected to them in a weird way somehow. Like I've seen like I've made friends, you know, throughout this like filmmaking career, and then I watch like their personal films, and I'm like, wow, I feel like I've seen this like whole different person. And like now I have like these thoughts that are different from, you know, I don't know how to explain it, but now because I feel like I live a very regular life outside of filmmaking. Like I work at the city of Boston, and I'm like a very regular person. And then I explain to people, I'm like, hey, outside of like my life here, I've made a film and all of these like cool things. And so when they ask to watch it, I feel almost like I'm like, oh, you want to watch it? And then I'm like, you're gonna get to know me really quickly in like an hour and a half. Like, how cool are you with that? Like, and yeah, it's a lot. And especially like, you know, people, it's interesting also because like my best friend is in this film, and I don't live in the same town as her anymore. And to like live in the city, and then people watch this film and then they ask questions about Estefania, it's also kind of very strange, because I'm like, what do you mean you don't know Estefania? Like, she's like all of my like life and my whole world, and like you're telling me you don't know her. So yeah, that's
I want to remind folks, if you have questions, drop them into the Q&A chat. I'll be weaving them in and checking back for those, and happy to take those questions. In the meantime, like, talk a bit, and I guess mostly for Michael and Gregory and Ted, talk a bit about your ongoing relationship with your subjects, and how I think it's, you know, it's such a weird process, right? Because you make a movie and then you're going to go make another movie, but you're going to be connected to these people forever. And how do you feel about that process? How do you navigate that?
I would say for me, it was a little bit easier on this one because we already had the relationship. But of course, there were other people who ended up being major characters in the film who I did not know before we started filming. And so, you know, it really does feel like we've created a small family together. And I don't know, it's one of the perks of the job for me, I guess, you know, is getting to, you know, have these extraordinary people in my life, and to, you know, to have these other experiences with them, you know, going, you know, traveling out of the country, which, you know, we were able to get Patrice and Gary out of the country for the first time in their lives. And, you know, and to be able to take folks, you know, to be able to go around with them and to be able to see people getting to meet them has been like, has been a real gift. And just seeing like how their story touches people's lives has been great. Yeah, you know, I think it's like, you know, it is, I guess it is like kind of a different phase in a relationship, you know, like for the people in the film who like I only knew through filming, you know, but I think but again, I guess at the end of the day, the film was only possible because we all did form just a really, really strong bond together. We all did, these are all people that, I trust as much as I feel like they trust me. And, we still talk all the time, we still see each other all the time. Yeah, it's just, I feel lucky that I get to kind of go on this, the adventure of this film with this whole group. And, yeah, it's been great. And just getting to experience it with everybody and see the whole experience through their eyes has also been really great too. Just seeing how everybody is dealing with it and taking it in.
And for us, we're okay.
Well, I mean, it's first of all, it's just, it's such a privilege to be invited into these communities, into these lives, and to just to be able to witness that, and then have the privilege, the honor, the responsibility of sharing that with the world is not something that we take lightly. And we, while we are making these films, we do get to know people really well. We spend a lot of time with them, and especially in Argentina, where so much of life happens over the asado. You spend a lot of time, drinking warm beer over the fire and grilling meat, and through that you get to build deep relationships. Since the film, well, we premiered the film at Sundance a year ago now, and we were lucky to be able to bring two of the Gauchos in the film, Guada and Tati, to the premiere, which was a it's a big, really big trip it's a really big trip to get from where they are in the Salta province of Argentina to anywhere in the United States. And then Sundance is just such a crazy experience for anybody, regardless of where you're coming from. And for Guada, it was, I think, the second time that she had been to a movie theater, and we had just finished the film 3 days before, so we'd never seen it with an audience, and no one had really seen the film, and she was there watching the film in Sundance in Utah for at the second time ever seeing a movie with herself like 30 feet on the screen. And she was incredibly, we were all incredibly moved. And she was, we make these films to celebrate these people that we love, and the most important thing is that they love it. And she really, she and her father were really touched by it. And afterwards, her father Tati, who's in the film, kind of giving her advice, started talking. And I'll let you say what he said, Mike, because it was so beautiful.
Yeah, it got in front of 1,000 people, and the first question was about the two different worlds that we live in: the world of the U.S., of capitalism, and the world of rural Argentina. And his first response was, "We all have the same heart." And then the whole audience just went, "Wow!" It was incredible. And we're also, our films aren't impact films per se, but of course, we fall in love with these communities, and they become part of our extended families, and we end up doing something for these communities when the film is over. With each one of the families of the film, we're doing things we've done in the past, things we're doing now. With truffle hunters in the past, they were clear cutting the forest, and that was a problem because I think we made these films because we want to conserve communities. So no forest, no truffle hunters. So we ended up raising quite a bit of money, buying a lot of the forest land we made the film and giving it back to the truffle hunters in perpetuity. So they have this land forever. And now we started a wine company, Truffle Hunter Wines. It's a really good wine. And all that money, 100% of it, doesn't go to us. It goes to the conservation program. So the program is, it's becoming quite large. They're public parks now. And we have 15 full-time volunteers. We planted 1,200 oak trees. So it's like a big program. So we try to do that with all the films that we do. So they do become part of our family.
A quick related question on impact. Ted, someone in the chat mentioned that the IRS had actually, and the Social Security Administration had actually put out a response on their site to Patrice the movie. And talk about that a little bit and what that means for you as a filmmaker. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, sorry, guys. Sorry, yeah, when you asked before about like the most surprising reaction, I probably should have said this. It was like 24 hours after the film went live on Hulu, the Social Security Administration put out a statement about the film. And it said, hey, to the makers of Patrice the movie, to Patrice Jeter herself, to her partner, Gary Wickham. And it basically said in the press release that, like, hey, we understand that we have outdated rules that need to change. But the press release is basically saying, but we just want to remind everybody that we don't set the rules, we enforce them. It's Congress that actually makes the rules, but we stand by ready to help Congress make those changes as soon as they are ready to do so, which was huge because, I mean, you know, advocates have been working on disabled marriage equality for years and years and years. And this is the first time the Social Security Administration ever said publicly that there was anything wrong with their rules. It was the first time that they ever put any pressure on Congress, albeit polite pressure, to make any changes. So that was a huge surprise. I mean, all of the advocates we worked with, you know, they kept saying that their biggest impediment to changing the rules for Social Security was just awareness. You know, there's bills that have been drafted and written and sitting around for years. There's like 4 different bills that like advocates just can't get up for a vote because there's no political will to do it because just nobody's talking about it. And so we kind of hoped that we could do at least that much, you know, just get the word out and just make it something that, you know, had more visibility. But to, you know, to have that direct a response that fast, literally 24 hours after the film came out, was really exciting. And then actually since then, through a series of events involving some connections with the folks at Special Olympics, Patrice was actually able to go to the White House and have dinner with President Biden, was sat next to him and was given time to speak about disabled marriage equality and the importance of pushing for it. And he actually name-checked her and mentioned the issue on C-SPAN that same day. And it was the first time a sitting president has ever mentioned the issue publicly, has ever you know, brought any awareness to it whatsoever. And that has been really exciting, I got to say. You always hope that if you're making something to shine light on an issue that it can have some measurable difference. And so it's just really exciting to get to see that there is some momentum here. We're actually going to be back in DC next week, actually doing a screening for lawmakers, trying to get other folks in Congress to co-sponsor one of the bills so it can go up for a vote. Granted, we are in a much more challenging political environment than we were recently. But, you know, hopefully the film can also help underscore that not only is this issue really important, which, you know, thankfully has always been somewhat bipartisan, but, you know, as there's talks of gutting Medicaid 50%, like, I'm hoping that, you know, this story can also be a reminder to people about how tragic and awful that would be. And, you know, these are just some of the people whose lives would be impacted by that. Yeah, but it's, you know, it's been exciting to get this kind of momentum, and we're trying to work really hard to just keep it going.
Excellent. Johan, I wonder if in your like deep digging through, you know, the archive and pulling out all the incredible things you pulled out, was there a thing that you found and you were like, this is so good, but it's not for this movie, it's for another movie?
Okay. Well, there's a lot of stuff that we found that I was like, that I thought that has to be in the movie. Like, for example, William Burden, president of MoMA at the time in 1960, who was advisor to the Pentagon. He was CEO of Lockheed and then was appointed ambassador to Brussels, US ambassador to Brussels. And then his cables to Alan Dulles, the CIA, that actually, here's the president of MoMA, he's a secret CIA agent. And we did find his audio at Columbia University, the Department of Diplomatic Studies, because of 60 years later, that maybe in a sense could be released. But literally here is saying, you know, the Belgians are toying with the idea of assassinating Patrice Lumumba. And I think it wouldn't be a bad idea either. Patrice Lumumba was such a damn nuisance, a political assassination would be obvious. And this is the president of MoMA and the US ambassador to Brussels. And I was like, I fell from my chair. So audio had never been released, but similar with the Arm Twisters audio of Howard Embry, who was a PR agent. He had actually a whole building in front of the United Nations, and he had a whole army of PR agents, but they were all paid for by the CIA. So literally it was an army of CIA agents that actually on international territory of the United Nations, which is very illegal, CIA agents would actually buy up the votes, arm twisting, they say it, and buy up the votes of the global south. And so these are things that actually I did not know. It was like I fell from my chair again. But also the story of André Blouin, you know, you were just talking about impact, but history has in a twisted ways, maybe some sort of form of redemption, where actually the memoirs have been republished 2 weeks ago by her daughter, Yves Blouin, who was advisor to the film, who's also featured as a little kid in the Home movies. But André Blouin's story, which was written out of history, is actually written back into history. And we had some screenings in Brussels with the Congolese community. And you have this younger generation, very much activists, part of the Afropi community, that came with the book of André Blouin to the screening. I was happily surprised that suddenly that story is out there. Also in the Congo, where the film has been shown there, but it's been pirated and it goes around. And tomorrow it's premiering in Nairobi with the grandson of Patrice Lumumba. And you know, there's a lot of reverb where I get emails from Africa that I say, wow, there is a reverb that I think is amazing. That actually there's sort of a rewriting of history, as James Baldwin says. You know, history is not the past. History is what we are and how we are configured, and that history is co-written by the perpetrator and the perpetrated upon. But there's many stories. But what would I take for? Well, there's a little ET in the film as part of some found footage, which is Russian KGB ET footage that actually was acquired from the CIA. And I thought, hey, here we have something that maybe is an interesting itinerary for the next film, the imaginary unknown and the multi-species kind of connection to the other. Anyway, that's still in the make, work in progress.
That brings me to what I think is probably my last question, which is sort of, I think, you know, you finish a project and some filmmakers are like, and now I want to do the next one that's going to be really similar to this because this is the thing I care about. And some filmmakers are going to be like, no, I want to go 180 degrees and make something totally different. What do you all see? Not specifically about your next films, but how do you feel like one film informs the next for you?
I mean, for Michael and I think it's a continuation of a passion and a fascination that we share of looking at communities and cultures that, you know, have not fallen into the rut or the trap or the sameness that has kind of taken over so much of the world, with lives that are just completely dominated by technology and removed from nature and community. And those, you know, those places that still have held on to that connection to nature, to community, to traditions, they're becoming harder and harder to find in the world. But it's something that we're just deeply interested in exploring and learning from them, and hopefully finding things that we can share with the rest of the world, because there's I think a lot to learn from them, and I think a lot that, you know, as a global culture that we can hopefully bring with us into the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's, you know, there's a few things. I mean, I'm endlessly interested by people who are, you know, trying to make the world around them look more like the world that they want to be in big ways and in small ways, and just like what the tension is in doing that. But also, you know, I'm always interested in, you know, finding complex portraits of humans. You know, I think that's something that the film can do really well, is to show the complexity of humans, and show all the good and the bad, the contradictions that we all carry inside. And it can be a space where we can look in that without judgment, and look in that with love, and look at that, you know, in a way that, you know, we can forgive each other, maybe forgive ourselves, or just fall in love with each other. Yeah, but at the end of the day, I guess, you know, I always feel like I'm pulled to stories about humans who are overcoming some sort of obstacle in their way, that happens to be some larger systemic issue, and being able to see the lived experience of that, which is not something you typically get to see in the news or in in writing even. I think there's just a way where you can just literally just experience the world with somebody, as much as that's possible through a camera. I just think it's just a special and unique gift that documentary gives us.
Johan, will you? Oh, you're still muted.
So the question was that.
Do you think
that wouldn't?
For you, do you think you'll stay in? Will continue with stories of Africa and colonialism? Do you want to go a different direction? Is it the extraterrestrial direction? Well,
I would call it the multi-species parliament or something. But for me, it's more like working backwards. It was shadow world very much. The whole like global arms trade, and finding out that war has actually become privatized, and that it's actually not, I wouldn't call it defense industry, but war industry that defines very much foreign policy. That actually informed the template that very much was the template for the next film, which was then about the Belgian Congo, but also about the 15th General Assembly and how the United Nations as a body is actually unilaterally being sort of exploited through that extraction economy. But those two films are all about, what's wrong with the world. I think it's also as crucial to maybe start thinking, where do we head from there, right? What is our connection to the world? And hence, maybe another direction with this sort of multi-species parliament.
Michael, Gregory, Ted, Johan, and Silvia, who had to jump off, I want to thank you so much for joining us here today, for sharing your thoughts. Folks, if you haven't already seen them, go see Gaucho Gaucho, see Hummingbirds, see Patrice the movie, see Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat. All fantastic movies. Congratulations to you all, and thanks for joining me in conversation today.
Thanks, David. Nice meeting you, Ted and Johan.